So I'm reading from Isaiah 35, the joy of the redeemed. Cool. All right. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance. With divine retribution, he will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground bubbling springs, in the haunts where jackals once lay. Grass and reeds and papyrus will grow. And a highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. It will be for those who walk on that way.
Thank you, Sarah. As Peter mentioned, I've got the privilege of sharing a message with you all today. Before I start, I did want to acknowledge the long-standing tradition Eastview has of lay preachers taking a part. I've absolutely appreciated during my time here at Eastview the opportunity to hear from so many of our congregation. And I also wanted to just acknowledge Viv Coleman's role in enabling that over the many years. She trained a group of about 7 or 8 of us up many years ago now, and I still remember the message I wrote and preached on so long ago, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity today. And I know that this month with Rob and Jono and Jen is going to be really, really special. I'm here today to talk about the change of seasons. Isn't it a great time of the year? Look at the sun is out, the days are long, and the weather is too hot to actually get anything done meaningfully around the house. Only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the noonday sun. It's time for a siesta. Go hide away from the glaring rays of the sun and wait for the cool evening to go out. Oh yeah. How many of you guys were able to do that this summer? In Shakespeare's play, I'm an English teacher, so I had to mention Shakespeare in my message. In Shakespeare's play, Richard III, Gloucester says, "Now is the winter of our discontent." The dark tragedy of Richard III lends itself to this phrase that we often share, not just as English teachers, about the discontent that comes with winter, when we complain about the dark days, the onset of seasonal affective depression, the rainy season. How many of you guys remember last winter when none of us who were taking our sons and daughters to the soccer field or the netball field or the rugby field on Saturday mornings had a single day of rain to deal with? It was sunny every day, and we wished we needed sunblock on those Saturday mornings on the sports field because winter was actually nice and settled. Now, obviously, the 4 seasons don't always determine our mood. They don't always change our psychology. They don't always determine the activities that we do. But it is something universal for us as humans that somehow we are still affected by the seasons of the natural world around us. Even if we live in a big city, even if we can get our produce trucked in from Australia, flown in from Australia when it's out of season to buy oranges or citrus fruits in Auckland, we can still get oranges and citrus in our supermarkets. And these phrases and expressions that have come to us from Shakespeare or from our grandparents or from our parents or that we just always know about are phrases and expressions that make up so much of our discourse and the way we speak. Up on the screen, I'm aware that's a bit little, we've got all these phrases. There's 4 seasons in one day. We're singing in the rain. It's the dog days of summertime. Now is the winter of our discontent. These are phrases and expressions that we use to talk about how the seasons determine how we feel and how we look and how we act. And after all these challenges that we've faced with the weather over the last few years and the last few months, look what's happened to our neighbors in Auckland. Look what's happened with this 1 in 1,000-year flood that we've had to deal with, and that so many of our neighbors in Auckland will be dealing with for so much time to come. So today I wanted to use this inspiration of the 4 seasons to share a message about God's purpose in our lives and the opportunities that he gives us. As many of you know, I am originally from the Great North in Canada. And this past summer break, my wife Bex and I were finally able to take our family back for a winter Christmas with their Canadian family. And the change of the seasons really played on my mind as I was planning this really special trip. With COVID and the challenges of having a young family, I had not been home to see my family since 2017. And as I planned this trip, thinking of going back for winter and going back to the snow and the darkness of Canada really played on my mind. It tempted my dreams. It really upended the planning and preparation that I had. I was off kilter. I was going on my summer vacation as a high school teacher to the winter. I was going for rest and relaxation from the long winter and the changes of the seasons in New Zealand to go to the dark and the cold of Canada for rest and relaxation. Usually in the summertime, I'm tending my garden, and my wife and Bex and I are watering the trees that we've planted so that they don't die off. And instead, we were at home and we were planning around the snow blanketing the earth and the cold making everything go into that hibernation for the winter. I was off kilter. And then it turned out that the weather in New Zealand was just as off kilter as I was in my own mind, getting ready for my amazing trip. And we had a marvelous trip. I will tell you a bit more about it soon. And the swings and the roundabouts just from January that Aucklanders faced and that Kiwis faced and many of you faced was just a starting point for that really terrible tragedy affecting the flooding of Auckland last weekend. But I don't want to just focus on one season or that off-kilter relationship today. I want to talk about the spiritual significance of the change of the seasons. I want to talk about how the seasons play with us and how that is a really essential part for understanding the messages that God has put into the Bible for us. That full circle of the earth's growth and renewal is still something that matters to us, even if we get our tomatoes from a supermarket that's flown them in from Australia, or if we live in a city where we don't really notice what the seasons are actually like. The seasons are a deep metaphor in the Bible. In Ecclesiastes, the writer often attributed as King Solomon says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens." And this metaphor isn't used, the metaphor of the seasons, isn't just used to discuss the changing weather and climate or farming and food in the natural world. Today, I'm going to be trying to unpack what that metaphor means when we look at our own individual lives. What are the seasons that Solomon is referring to, and why are they significant? The beauty of the metaphor is that we can use the seasons and their changes and the different character that they each have to understand how we grow through the year as individuals, how we undertake new activities and meet new people and face new challenges and make new achievements and new commitments and new promises and new hopes and dreams as the seasons progress in our lives. All the activities under the heavens, as Ecclesiastes says. Hopefully, as we consider the different meanings of the 4 seasons and how these reflect the changes and the developments in our lives and in our community, we'll see that God has given us these 4 seasons to encourage us to change and to open up space for new growth. Hopefully, we'll have a new appreciation for the times in our lives when God gives us a change or a challenge or a moment to grow. and that we can use that appreciation of the changes of the seasons in our lives to bear witness to God's mighty power to transform us into his image. Let us pray. Dear Jesus, let your words settle in our hearts and souls today. And let us listen and learn in love and humility about the wisdom we gain from your word. Let us also acknowledge the great power you have over the natural world that you have set in motion, with great compassion for those facing tragedy and uncertainty from flooding, like our fellow neighbors in Auckland, and anyone else facing the challenges of climate and emergency and weather around the world. In a time of changing seasons and great uncertainty, let us live and learn in you, and let your presence renew us to grow in new ways. Eastview, part of the reason that Peter and the oversight team have set this plan in place is that we are entering a new season. Just like our children are going to school, and school teachers like me are having a little bit of a change to our holiday style and holiday mode, Eastview is going through a change of seasons, just like the wider community. It's super exciting. It's something that we will all need to be praying for and supporting one another as we get ready for, but it's something that we also need to celebrate because it is going to be a new challenge, an exciting challenge, but a new challenge nevertheless. Just like the changes that the seasons are undertaking and the climate is, we also need to acknowledge that God has set Eastview to look at a new season in our community as well. So the first point that I really wanted to celebrate and acknowledge is that changing seasons are a natural part of God's plan in our lives and in our communities and in the wider world. The first mentions of the seasons comes from the book of Genesis, when it's written that the seasons were established. Genesis says, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. The seasons of the earth and the cycles of life and the cycles of the growing of crops and food are a huge part of God's plan for us, even if we're not living that agricultural lifestyle that the ancient Israelites would have lived. And we all get a certain joy from living according to the seasons. I know one member of our Eastview community who may happen to sit behind this very drum kit from time to time, who really struggles with the heat of the summertime and who loves the cold breeze of the winter. And that when all of us are wearing puffer jackets and beanies and closed shoes to church in the winter, our favorite drummer at Eastview is wearing his jandals and rocking out his favorite t-shirt because he's finally got the climate that suits him. And many of us, in the middle of the winter when Dougal, I wasn't going to mention his name, when Dougal's wearing his jandals finally and absolutely feeling like he's at his best self, how many of you are sitting there in your puffer jackets and feeling a bit grumpy with Dougal for looking very happy and wishing you could go off to Fiji or the Cook Islands and get a bit of sunshine? So many cultures around the world speak about the seasons in mythological terms, but they still matter to us. Now, maybe it's my Canadian constitution, or maybe it's my love of the outdoors, but I have always loved all four seasons. Some of you may know, but I met Bex, who is very Kiwi, just like many of you. I met Bex in Europe when we were studying at university, and she told me about this lovely island with volcanoes and beaches and black sand, and really inspired my love of wanting to travel to New Zealand and see it. And as I was preparing to come down and visit her for the first time in New Zealand on my gap year after uni, I had this picture on my screensaver of my computer, which was Cathedral Cove in the middle of the summertime. And this picture, honestly, to me, I didn't know what summertime in New Zealand was really like, but in my mind, New Zealand was a bit like the tropical islands. It was always sunny. Cathedral Cove always had beautiful azure blue waters. It was never facing a track closed with slips and may not open, and the water all murky and dry, and the wind raging, and the swells and the waves being treacherous. But New Zealand to me was one season, and it was beautiful summer, And I have to admit, even though I was excited to come down and spend more time with this cute Kiwi girl that I'd met at uni, I was a bit nervous and apprehensive that it would just be a bit too summery for me, because I love the 4 seasons. Luckily, New Zealand does get all 4 seasons. I learned that going to work at the ski hill at Mount Ruapehu, and I made that promise to Bex that I would stay here, and we got married, and the rest is actually history. But luckily, New Zealand gets 4 seasons, sometimes all in one day, and I do like that too. So I wanted to spend a bit of time now just considering the 4 seasons and the different characteristics they have. So just to take you on a bit of a journey through my thoughts and musings on the change of the seasons and what that says about God's purpose. Now, the Jeffrey family had an amazing trip. This is the boys playing in the snow outside the creche, outside my family's church that I grew up at in Mount Forest, Ontario, Canada. So going off to see the nativity scene of celebrating the first Christmas in a desert climate in Israel, where the boys definitely needed all the snow gear that my mum was able to collect and play in the snow. And we had such an amazing trip. So that's the Canadians in their natural habitat. And the snowstorm that we had, it was actually a miracle that we got home, but it was a Canadian kid's dream. It is not always that snowy and beautiful and perfect. Often it's just kind of muddy and green and brown and cold and yuck. As I mentioned earlier, winter has always spun me around as a transplanted Kiwi. I still think of December as winter break, even though I am a New Zealand school teacher who was on summer holiday until Thursday. Christmas for me was really tough until our boys made it really magical again. I still talk about the July school holidays as summer, even though it's the middle of the dark and dreary winter in the Southern Hemisphere. So, this summer, I had a wonderful winter trip, if that makes any sense. We had the snowfall of a kid's dreams. My family got to see their Kiwi Canadian grandkids playing in the snow and loving it just like every Canadian kid dreams of. It was special, and it was a real miracle that we got home. But winter is cold, and it is challenging. But for many people, there is some joy in the small pleasures of winter. That warm cup of hot chocolate, or the low light letting you snuggle up at home and not worry about having to work in the garden. But for many Northerners, winter can be harsh and can be miserable. It can be the winter of discontent. Seasonal affective depression is a real thing, not just for Canadians and other Northern folks, but also for people in New Zealand facing the challenges of the low sunlight. Winter can be a holding place, a waiting for the sun to come back and for the real work to begin. Kiwis often do get excited about the snow in the winter, and they talk about going to the snow. My mum and dad from Canada, my dad kind of appreciates it, he loves winter, but my mum, the last time they were here in 2016 for the winter trip, the boys said, "Oh, we want to take our Canadian family to the snow, we'll go to Mount Ruapehu." And we got there, and my Canadian family enjoyed it as they did, but afterwards my mum said, I didn't really want to go, because the snow comes to Canadians, even if they don't want it to, unless they go to Florida. And again, for the ancient Israelites, winter in the harsh desert climate was respite. So many Israelis would have looked to winter as the time of celebrating the fact that actually their desert climate became more bearable and more livable. Sarah read us the Bible verse from Isaiah 35, and Isaiah's prophetic vision of the Messiah coming to Israel is related to this language of the 4 seasons and that change of seasons that comes. Isaiah writes, "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy." For Israel, the coming of the Messiah brings new growth, the life-giving water that allows the harsh landscape to grow the food and crops they need to support them. And that's a little bit like the way the winter comes to us and the change of the seasons comes to us in Auckland in 2023. The change of the seasons come to refresh us, to change things, to allow new things to grow. And that is a natural part of God's plan. And this metaphor that I was speaking about earlier, that runs throughout the Old Testament, is in Isaiah's writings as well. The metaphor comes with the 4 seasons, that the new growth gives a space for us to grow into the joy and the beauty that God has promised us when the Messiah comes. That this new growth allows us to grow into his own image. And this isn't something that Isaiah takes lightly. And so this metaphor does acknowledge that challenging side of the change of seasons. Isaiah writes, "The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow, and a highway will be there, and it will be called the way of holiness, and it will be for those who walk on that way." Just like this image shows of the river in the desert bringing life to a harsh and arid climate. For Isaiah, the changing seasons of the landscape in Israel represent that metaphor of growing into a holy way, of moving out of the harsh desert into the blooming, life-giving spring, leads us to the holy way that God wants us to live. God is using these changing seasons in our lives not to get us bogged down with winter or obsessed with one way of living or one activity, like the book of Ecclesiastes says, but to open up space for us to grow into the image that he's designed for us, to take on new activities, whether that's gardening in the summertime or skiing in the wintertime, or of managing those different psychological states of activity that come with those different times. Just like winter comes after the bright and hot summer, and spring breaks up the dark and cold of winter, God allows the seasons of our lives to change so that we have space to grow. That space to grow isn't just a space for us in our own individual psychology or our own emotions or feelings or activities, but it's also a space for our community to grow and to change. And so as our community realizes these changing seasons, the changing school terms, the change of having a new pastor coming to give us the leadership and guidance that we are ready for, likewise, that is a change of season that God has allowed for us to have space to grow into Jesus' image. So after winter comes spring. Bex and I have a very great friend from Japan, and she loves the cherry blossom season. And her Japanese Kiwi sons always make a habit of going to Cornwall Park to see the cherry blossoms in spring. And this is another area of my transplanted life as a Canadian Kiwi that does confuse me, and it may confuse some of you who've had the change from north to south in your lives. My birthday is in April. I've always been proud of being a spring baby. The new plants are coming out, the snow is melting, the birds are returning to Canada from their winter migration. But now that I live down under in the southern hemisphere, I am an autumn baby. I have to deal with the days getting cooler, the sunlight lasting a little bit less long every morning. And to be honest, I love April in Canada and in New Zealand. And springtime for us, with a northern mythology and a northern attachment to the seasons, is probably the same meaning that winter had for the Israelites, as we read about in Isaiah. Spring is new. It brings new growth. It brings the promise of summer. It's a time for planting in the garden. But springtime, for so many of us, represents that transformative power that God brings to us. So when we read Isaiah talking about the desert having the crocus blooming and the jackals being pushed away and the reeds and the papyrus growing, we're probably thinking of some of the things that we associate in our culture with springtime. That change and growth that comes to us in spring is really a testimony to God's transformative power. Later in Isaiah, in chapter 43, Isaiah writes that God's transformative power really takes over us. And I think this is where we can see in our lives how that transformative power works. And we get a little bit more of an understanding of this metaphor of what the seasons do to us and our headspace as individuals, and also our relationship with our community and with the wider world. In chapter 43, Isaiah writes, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland." The promise from the prophet is about following the Messiah, following the ways of the Lord. And we as Christians know that the ways of the Lord are the ways of Jesus. The words of the prophet give encouragement and support to us as followers of Jesus. Our way of life, our way of living, is a new thing. It's something remarkable that brings life to the wasteland. It's something remarkable that brings new growth to who we are and what we're doing. It's something remarkable that brings us the time and space to realize the new activities that come with the new seasons that are around us. It brings water to the desert. It brings a stream to the wasteland. It brings life where there was hibernation and barrenness. That constant turning of the seasons ensures that we are always given opportunities to turn into God's promise, to take on a new challenge, to start something new, to take on a new thing. It lets us find opportunities to find that gift that Jesus gives us of peace and opportunity and grace. And we get that opportunity right now at Eastview as we start a brand new school term, a brand new season of kids' church, and a new season with a new pastor joining us soon. Yes, there will be seasons of old growth coming to an end. That is part of what happens in the 4 seasons. The plants wither and die. The birds fly off somewhere else. We have to change the clothing we use or the sheets on the bed to manage the cold and the way we live our lives according to these seasons. But those changes are developing because God is opening up new opportunities for us to become the people that He wishes us to be. And He gives us those new opportunities to work to understand His purpose for us more carefully as we take on new activities. So when we say that springtime brings a young person's fancy to love, likewise springtime brings us to summer, the dog days of summer, when only mad dogs and Englishmen go out. Until yesterday, a lot of us would have been questioning, did New Zealand really have a summertime? But yesterday, it dried out for us. I know I got a little bit too much sun myself as I was busy working in the garden, taking on all those jobs that hadn't been done since last year before we went away. And summer comes with it all kinds of things. And if you're someone like Dougal who hides away from the summertime sun, then you might be hoping for autumn to come quickly. If you're someone who needs to sit outside and cook a little bit in the sunshine to feel like you're really alive, you might be really glad that you've at least had, I'm not even going to jinx it, but maybe 24 hours of sunshine. Hopefully a bit more to come. And so summertime does come to an end. Sorry for all of you high school students out there who are going back to school and realizing that now that the good weather is out, you're going back to class, to sit in my English class or your science class or your chemistry class where you don't get to talk about the beach and all those fun things you've done in the summertime. But autumn does come. And with it comes that school term. And I think it is worth acknowledging that at Eastview, a big part of our seasons changing here is related to the New Zealand school terms. And maybe the school terms are designed and assigned based on some kind of old system with the farmers and having people around to tend the crops. But it is a part of our society and our life in New Zealand and in the wider world where kids go to school that the new school term starts as the summer comes to an end, or in New Zealand, as the summer actually gets going. Now, I know at Eastview that I attach a lot of the life of the church to the school terms. Maybe that's because I'm a teacher. But that's where we are as a church right now. We're at the beginning of the school term. our young people at kids' church probably don't really remember, some of them, what it was like. Some of them may be going up to the big kids church for the first time, and that they're going to be super excited about that. While we welcome those new teachers, those new students, those new friends, we're looking forward to where we go from here. And I think autumn in New Zealand is a part of that. It's not the end of summertime, but it's the start of that new change and that new growth that comes from the new school term, the new opportunities that come. Eastview is entering a new season. We've laid the groundwork. It has been amazing, and we've all worked on doing that together. It has been so richly rewarding to see us design that plan and that future together, and now to see that this season we are going to be welcoming that new leadership. And my hope and prayer is for Eastview to embrace this season, to see the opportunities that it gives us, to see that that opportunity, that change, is an opportunity for us to welcome God's growth and the way that that is going to bring up his change and opportunities that he's designed for us. But I also hope and pray that as these seasons change, that opens up your own lives as well. That it gives you the space to take on those new activities, those new hopes and dreams, those new goals and challenges. And as the seasons change, you remember that God is opening up that space for us. Because that is when we're going to have the real transformation in Jesus' name, is in those moments of change and growth, when we take on new things. So just to remind us all that changing seasons are a natural part of God's plan in our lives, in our communities, and in our world. The changes that we undertake are not changes to mourn something that is lost. They're changes that open up space for us to grow into Jesus' image. If we stay the same and we had a constant summertime, like what I envisioned, that picture of Cathedral Cove before I moved to New Zealand, we wouldn't have the opportunity to meet new friends on the sports field in the wintertime, or to go back to school and meet new friends and new teachers and take on new challenges. Or likewise, to have the summertime to refresh us and to help us not worry about the cold and the darkness. And finally, that change and growth is a testimony. It's something that we need to acknowledge and we need to share with people. With people who are complaining about the weather, we can say that weather is coming from God. That weather is a testimony of God's transformative power, because even if there were floods, even if there was rain, even if there was cold, there will be heat, there will be sun. And even if there is too much sun and too much heat for people like Dougal, there will be cold, and there will be a respite from all that. So we finish by remembering that, just like it says in Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything, and there is a season for every activity under the heavens. There is a new way coming for us. We are going to be doing a new thing, and it's exciting. And that way is the way of holiness that brings streams to the desert.